So thanks everyone for coming along. Can I introduce to you Lisa Campbell? Lisa works for her own organisation, Wonderful Me. She's based in Clitheroe in Lancashire. Uh, and Lisa, I'm going to let you tell all the interesting stuff about yourself and then just launch into the session.
Brilliant. Thanks, Leo. I don't normally do the talking about myself bit. Don't really like it. So my background is in education. I trained as a SENCO, a special educational needs coordinator, and I've done that in primary schools and secondary schools. And then about 2 years gone, so just a bit more than 2 years, on September, started Wonderful Me, which came out really of just a real recognition that the church is a safe and a good space in the community and has the potential to just journey so well with struggling families. And I guess in schools, noticing increasingly the need. Hi, Wendy. It's lovely to have you with us.
Hi.
Appeared. We've literally just started, so you haven't missed anything, don't worry.
Oh, good.
I'm just talking about myself, which I've said I don't really like. But so yeah, so Wonderful Me came out of just kind of wanting to create spaces in church where they're safe, where we can journey well with children. But I guess also recognizing that over the last 20 or 30 years, which we're going to get into in this little session tonight, our knowledge and understanding of the brain and how that works, and kind of understanding our whole sensory system really has changed hugely. And noticing that not all of that knowledge was trickling into people that needed it most, like grassroots working day in, day out with children. So Wonderful Me kind of is about that, really. It's about enabling and supporting churches to create safe spaces and bring safe approaches as they journey with families in their communities. So I'm really pleased that Megan chose to call this session Brains in Bloom, because actually growth and blooming is a really good analogy, I think, as we think about what's going on in our children's and in our teenagers' brains. So we're kind of going to hold the image of a rose bush in mind, and I am going to share my screen, and we'll dig in. Is that all right for everyone? Can we see it? Great. Thanks for the thumbs up. So we're going to hold that rose bush as we kind of explore the growth that happens in our children's brains and the strengthening and development that happens in our teenagers' brains, and actually into their 20s. So there have been some really beautiful and kind of enlightening discoveries as we've dug into the brain. But a lot of our learning is thanks to this person, this guy on the screen. He was called Lawrence Minkoff. And actually, I think he's a really, really brave man, because actually we know a lot more about the brains because we now have something called MRI scans, which was created by this guy, Dr. Raymond. But Lawrence was one of his students, and he volunteered to have the first MRI scan performed on him, which feels like a really, really brave thing to do. But because of his bravery, over the last 20, 30 years, because we now have MRI scans, we've been able to see kind of real time what is going on in our brains, because the brain isn't something you can just poke around in. It's quite fragile and gentle. So MRI scans have massively helped. And out of that have been some just really beautiful and enlightening discoveries that have caused us actually to rethink and reshape some of our traditional understanding. And I think a key discovery has, particularly with children and teenagers' brain development, has been to kind of debunk a bit of a myth that we've had for quite a while, that kind of the terrible twos and the terrible teens is all down to raging hormones. And yes, there are lots of hormonal changes going on in the body, but actually a lot of significant change is happening in their brains in those times. And actually a lot of the kind of struggle, the challenges, everything that goes on in that period of time is actually probably hugely down to changes in their brain rather than raging hormones. And actually for us that are journeying with children and young people, I think that's really empowering, because if we put it all down to raging hormones, that is actually, there's not much we can do about that. It's almost like we've kind of just got to kind of suck it up and survive this really challenging time the best that we can, while this kind of unfolds. But actually, when we understand that it's down to changes in the brain that are actually about preparing that child or young person for what is coming next, then we as adults can really also lean into that and learn how to support that period of change well. So I think it's been good learning, and I think it's empowering for us as adults to think, well, if that's what's going on, how do we support that and how do we journey it well? So that's what we're going to look at tonight. We're going to look at child brain development, adolescent brain development. I really need to say, I am not an expert, as in I am not a kind of psychologist. I'm not a therapist. It's great to hear that there seem to be some experts in the room. So Susan, feel free to chip in anytime you like. But what I am is a kind of Senko that has learned from the experts, and my job is really to kind of help us take some of that rich learning and think, okay, so how can we learn from it, and what does that mean for us in our practice as children's workers, youth workers, as we journey with the children and young people in our care. So that's where we're heading. We're going to kick off with child brain development. So the child's brain is the only organ, your brain is the only organ in your body that isn't fully formed at birth, which is quite amazing. So when you are born, what is massively functioning is the lower part of your brain, the brain stem. And the brain stem is the bit of your brain that is responsible for things like your reflexes, your emotions, all of that kind of stuff, which makes sense when we think about babies. They are kind of just big sensory and impulse beings, aren't they? The sucking reflex, they're working on their reflexes. And that's because it's the brain stem that is largely what is online. Up top, what they've got is the prefrontal cortex. It's like the thinking part of your brain. And so what they have is kind of like lots of building blocks. So think of Lego. And what's happening, particularly over the first 5 years of life, is those Lego blocks are being formed together and these connections are being made. And they reckon that there are more than 1 million new neural connections made every second, which is incredible. So in the rosebush analogy, that childhood is this period of rapid growth. There's neurons firing left, right, and center as the brain literally is building itself and forming itself. So that's what's going on in our children's brains. And I guess what we need to think about is, what does that mean for us, knowing that? So knowing that as our children are born, they're born really instinctive, their kind of thinking brain is still developing. All of that work is going on to build it. What does that mean in the approach that we bring to our children as we journey with them? And I think the first thing for us to think about is that connection is really, really crucial. Our brains are literally built through connection. We're wired for connection. So that thinking part of the brain, as it's being built, it's built by sensory activity. It's built by connection with safe caregivers. So all the stuff that we do with babies that just feels quite instinctive and we don't really realize why we're doing it. The whole kind of peekaboo, looking at them in the face, all of those beautiful games that go on, all of those connections are literally helping to form our children's brains. And it really reminds us of the importance of relationship and connection, which for us as followers of Jesus shouldn't really be a surprise, because when we look to the Bible, it is all about relationship. So we've got just the very Trinity relationship of God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. We zoom out and we look at the big picture story of the Bible is a story of God's relationship with us and the importance of our connection with Him. And then Jesus talks about connection all the time. John 15, he talks about remaining in me, the vine and the branches. That connection and relationship is just wired in. It's part of the story of the Bible. And connection with God for us is central to what is going on in our faith. But we're also reminded of the importance of connection with each other, that whole kind of don't give up the habit of meeting together. We're wired and we're built to be in connection, and connection is so important. So I love that as we're learning about the brain and looking at what's happening, the science that we're learning really is just echoing the truths that we've always known in Scripture. It's like the science is catching up, and we're kind of able to understand that in more of a scientific way. So healthy and safe connection the children that we're journeying with is so important, and it literally is building their brains. So as you are journeying with the kids in your groups, as you are seeing them, as you are making connection with them, you are literally helping to build their brains in a safe and a healthy way. So I think that's the first thing for us as adults to think about, is the importance of connection. And then the second thing is safety. Um, so as we kind of look at this whole brain building process, it reminds us of the importance of building safe spaces. There's a guy called Dan Siegel. So if this kind of brain stuff and the science stuff really interests you, I really recommend this book called The Whole Brain Child. It's by a guy called Dan Siegel. So he's a psychiatrist, but he is also a leading neuroscientist. He is hugely well thought of in this whole world of understanding our brains, our bodies, our sensory systems. He's kind of laid out a lot of foundational work. And this book is written for parents. So it's kind of supposed to be, I still have to really concentrate when I read it, but it's aimed to be understandable and give us some really, really good strategies. So when I was talking about the brain, I was using my hand because one of his strategies is to talk about a hand brain and use our fist as a model. So he brings out some really, really good things. I really recommend him. That's his book on child brain development. And then when we get to it, Brainstorm is his one on teenage brain development. So if you want to go a bit deeper, they're a good look. But basically, in his books, he talks about the importance of children feeling seen and safe, soothed and secure. And in brain terms, what we've learned is that when we experience stress, or when we feel unsafe, one of the things that happens is a chemical called cortisol is released. Now, cortisol plays a really important part in our body's basic defense system. It raises our blood sugar levels and it boosts our energy levels. So it's preparing our bodies to kind of fight off danger and keep itself safe. So it's a really, really good thing. And a limit, a kind of a small amount of stress in a kind of safe space is also good for us because it builds resilience in our brains and it helps them grow and develop. But what we're not designed for is to live in stress and feel unsafe in a kind of long-term way. And that prolonged exposure to high levels of cortisol can break down neural pathways that our children's young brains are building. So stress and feeling unsafe can really hinder brain development and break it down. It's why when we look through MRI scans at the brains of children who've experienced trauma, there's a physical difference in the way that their brains have developed because that cortisol has rushed around and really kind of intercepted healthy brain development. So safety is hugely, hugely important. And when we create safe spaces in our churches that enable our children to feel seen and safe and soothed and secure, we're enabling their developing brains to flourish in a really, really healthy way. So that's a whole lot of science in a really, really quick way. Megan's like, you've got about 15, 20 minutes in total to do your topic. And I want you to talk about brain development in children and in young people. So it's a bit of a big ask tonight and there's a lot to cover. So what I thought we'd do is we'll do it in little bits of chunks. So that's the kind of chunk on looking at child brain development. And there's not many of us. So I think we can probably stay together and not need to go into breakout rooms. But we're just going to have a little bit of a pause and a bit of a reflect. So I kind of quite like to have a wonder moment. There's different kinds of wonder. We can kind of be in wonder, like, oh, whoa, that's really, really cool. Or we can kind of wonder, like, I wonder how that happens. So we're going to think about both of those kinds of wonder. I'll just give you a minute. I've got to stop sharing my screen, and that always takes me a minute anyway. Have a think. So of what we've looked at so far, or of what you know, we can widen it up. There's experience in the room of child brain development. Is there anything that's made you go, whoa, that's quite cool? We need to think more on that. Or is there anything that's making you go, I'm not really sure about that. I wonder what that means. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and we can have a chat. Now, this is where I can kind of quite happily get teachery. So I'll leave the space and open it up, and feel free to just jump in if you've got any thoughts, reflections, or questions. Otherwise, I'll just go teachery and pick on people by name. I'm going to try and keep quiet, so do feel free. Susan, yes, I saw her
Just
hand.
my thought always is that young young children, their brains are they're like sponges. What they actually can actually absorb and absorb far more than you realise. Given the right conditions, okay, but that they're well and that they've had enough sleep and whatever. But it's fantastic what we can feed into children now. Their learning ability is enhanced because I suppose we know so much more, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, that is a really good thing for us to think about in churches. I think sometimes we just don't expect very much of our children, or we don't expect them to be interested, but they are like exactly like you said, their brains are like sponges, they're ready to soak up. And if we do that with connection, if we do that in a personal way, if we do that in a safe way, helping them feel safe and seen, then they're even more receptive. And then we can widen it and recognize that still the huge part of their brain that is mostly online is this brainstem area that is really sensory. So let's bring some sensory input in, and let's really kind of use our senses as we're learning. And then you've just really got a beautiful thing in what we're doing with our kids in church. So yeah, brilliant. Really good.
Lisa,
We've
you
got
talked in your second slide about safe spaces.
Yeah.
Now, I think in most churches, we would think of safe spaces in regard of literally health and safety and risk assessment, soft toys, no sharp corners. But I suspect you mean much more than that. Do you want to say a little bit more about what
Yeah,
makes a
so I
safe
do like a
space?
whole 2 hour training session just on that. So I'll do it in about 30 seconds. So I think the four words that we had on the screen about safe and seen and soothed and secure are a really good starting point. I do on my website, there's quite a lot of free resources. So feel free to jump on there at the end. But there's a tool you'll find on there called Stars of Safety. And I'm going to put myself on the spot and not remember my own tool here. But it's an acronym for creating a safe space. So it stands for, I'm not going to remember them all, structure. So things like understanding what is going to come when in your session is super important. That is particularly important for children with neurodiversity. Because if they don't know what is coming next, also children that have experienced trauma, if you don't know what is coming next, how do you know that you're in a safe space? And if you don't feel like you're in a safe space, then what's happening is that reaction around keeping yourself safe, and the cortisol that starts rushing through your body takes over, and you're not really present and you're not able to join in with that session. So a really simple thing like having a visual timetable for your session that says what is going to happen and what's coming next can really, really help a child feel safe in your space. Transitions, really similarly. So thinking how you move from one thing to the next. So giving a timer. We do it with small children and then we just kind of forget to do it. When my girls were toddlers, I would always say like, a 5-minute warning before we left the park. I think we're often quite good at doing it with toddlers, but actually, I mean, I still quite like to have a little bit of warning about what's going to happen as an adult, but our kids really need it. So transitions is another one. A is for anchor. So that's how do we help our children anchor in the space, and having good routines is R. So anchor and routine can go really well together. So not feeling like you've continually got to ring the changes, but kind of having good routines again. So it's all those things. And then sensory, being aware of sensory processing, which we really can't dig into tonight because that's another whole session. But being aware of what helps our children's bodies to feel safe. Flickering lights can be really distracting for lots of children, uncomfortable textures, all of that stuff. So yeah, so it is wider, although I'm always a massive advocate for good safeguarding practice. So yes, it's wider than that, but let's really make sure that our spaces actually are safe. And then let's think about how we help them feel safe. Great. Anyone else? Yeah, Kathy.
Just thinking that Well, on a Sunday morning, we sometimes have one family who's got some children. Well, there's 3 children, one's a baby, and sometimes there's either one or both of the boys. One's 2 and the other's about 6, I think. So they're not used to coming into church at all. So, but we have got a rota now for taking, them out of the church service if they're there. But yeah, so it's getting the balance we're finding between, we want to teach them, have a focus, but as long as they're happy, find something for them to enjoy and feel welcome. At the moment, it doesn't actually matter if we don't teach them anything.
Yeah, although I think what Susan said was really important to remember around their brains being like sponges.
Yeah,
We can do both. And I think you create opportunity for learning, but actually what the starting point always for me has to be connection. Like the science backs it up. Like but connection and relationship is so crucially important. We're going to get onto that a little bit more with the teenage brain development. So yeah, getting to know them and creating a space where they feel safe and where they feel seen and they feel valued then creates opportunity to really journey well and do learning. But great. Kathy, did you have a question before we jump to adolescence?
Yeah, just a really quick thing that backs up really what Ruth was saying. We did a holiday club this morning and we'd got some really tiny ones and we'd got this banner at the front which had like a lion on it, which was trying to represent like the characteristics of Jesus. But this little girl, she was absolutely terrified of it. And I think it just opened my eyes really to like, it's not normally there either. And it took us ages to figure out what was causing to be so upset, but I just think it opened my eyes to think, well, it's just the room can be quite terrifying at times, can't it? It's so big and strange, and so we took it down and then she was absolutely fine. But just being aware of the space even is, and then like you say, they can't participate in the session because there's just too much going on. So yeah.
And I love that you listened to her, like communicating. Like she was obviously really, really upset. And
so upset.
I think most of us would probably want to comfort that. But for other children who are feeling distressed, it maybe doesn't come out in tears. It maybe comes out in them being a little bit aggressive because bodies are trying to explain, I am not okay and I'm not safe. And so I love that what you tried to do in that was tune in and go, hang on a minute, she's communicating to us that something is not right and we need to work that out. Tune in. So that's brilliant. Thanks. Right, I'm going to share so that we keep moving and we'll look at teenage brain development and it's completely, hang on. It's disappeared off my screen. Okay. I think we are there. Sorry. Now I've lost you. Let me try that again. There we go. Okay. Right, adolescent brain development. It's another whole kettle of fish when we start talking about teenagers. So we are talking about adolescent brain development here. So I will slip up, and I've already done it, and talk about teenagers. But adolescence is a period that starts kind of just before your teens and extends actually into your mid to late 20s. So your brain isn't fully developed until you are in your mid to late 20s. Which if any of you have had or still have older teens, my girls are now 17, 18, going on 18 and 2021. So they are in that period, which and it's learning that their brain is still developing is a good reminder and makes a lot of sense. So following that period of like massive rapid growth, where, as Susan brilliantly put it, our kids' brains are like sponges. There's then another period of huge change that takes place during this period of adolescence. And again, a lot of the challenges of adolescence have traditionally been put down to raging hormones. But what scientists have discovered is a lot of what is going on is actually down to changes in the brain. So Dan Siegel, in his teenage book, calls adolescence the great rewiring, because he's saying that what's happening in that time is huge changes are taking place in brain circuitry as the brain becomes more integrated and more coordinated. It's kind of becoming a bit more sophisticated. And effectively, what is happening is the brain is preparing itself for adulthood. It's strengthening and it's getting ready to move outside of the sheltered and safe environment of the family and move towards what's more unfamiliar, uncertain, uncomfortable, maybe even unsafe at times. But from a scientific perspective, what they've discovered is there's a few specific things going on in the brain at that time. So the first thing is there's this process of pruning that is taking place. So if we go back to our rose bush that we had, if childhood is this period of growth, adolescence is a period of pruning. So I am not a massive gardener. We live in a northern terraced house with a backyard. But what I am told is that when you have roses, if you just leave them to grow crazily, then the further away from the kind of stem and the roots that the flowers get, the less healthy they are. We prune them because we want to bring it closer back so that it's fed and watered well. And it's a similar thing with the teenage brain. So kids' brains have absorbed this huge amount of learning. They've grown all these new branches and leaves and flowers. It's gone a little bit crazy and wild. But just like a kind of rosebush can't sustain and nourish those flowers when they grow too far away from the stem, the brain won't operate effectively if it's trying to maintain this vast amount of knowledge that it's acquired. So what it does is it prunes and it specializes. So neural connections that have formed that continue to be used are kept. And those that aren't really used are pruned away. It's kind of a bit of a use it or lose it idea. Which actually, when I've sat with that as I was preparing for this session, thinking, oh my goodness, what when my girls were younger and this massive period of pruning was going on, what was it that was occupying their time? Because the stuff that they're spending time doing are the neural pathways that they're using. Those are the ones that we're going to keep. And all the stuff that isn't really used that often is kind of pruned away. So it's an interesting thing to sit with and a little bit scary. So it's kind of streamlining basically. And that streamlining creates capacity for these kind of more integrated and sophisticated neural networks to happen. So it supports things like working memory. It can support kind of a higher level of emotional balance and journeying with that. And it's basically preparing us for adulthood. And then the second thing that happens is something called myelin forms around the neural connections that it's keeping. And that myelin coating acts as like a protective coating that strengthens those connections. And it's thought that that myelin coating actually makes those connections up to 3,000 times faster and more efficient. So this coating kind of the circuitry that's kept is then also kind of bolstered and protected to make it more efficient and connected. So the brain is really becoming more integrated and coordinating. It's strengthening and it's preparing itself for adulthood. And all of that transition also then needs changes that happen in the brain circuitry. So as this period of pruning and strengthening is taking place, the wiring in the brain is also changing. So our kids' brains are basically kind of pushing away from childhood and moving towards adulthood. The brain is almost preparing itself to leave home. And one of those changes that happens is changes to the reward circuitry of the brain. So you may have come across something called dopamine levels. So dopamine is often called the reward hormone. So we get a dopamine boost when we do something that brings us pleasure. And in the adolescent brain, they've discovered that there's a massive increase in the amount of dopamine that's released. So they kind of get a bigger reward. So it's often thought that when we do something new, it's thought that the changes in dopamine levels in the adolescent brain causes them to kind of gravitate towards those thrilling experiences. So they kind of start seeking out a little bit thrill seeking. They're seeking out this dopamine rush because they're getting this bigger rush and they're really experiencing it and appreciating it. But it's thought that it's kind of one of the brain's ways of encouraging curiosity. So it's encouraging them to move outside of the kind of comfort of the nest, really, and to seek out new experiences and get this kind of thrill and this rush from the dopamine. So let's go back then. What does that mean for us as adults? Well, interestingly, I think it kind of means the same as it does for our kids. So, connection, first of all, remains important for our adolescent brains. So, we've talked about how we're wired for connection, and I think that is true whatever age we are. But I think it's really important that we recognize that this kind of time of transition where we're preparing for adulthood, I think sometimes it's thought of as moving from dependence to independence. But actually, I think we're wired for connection. None of us are supposed to be alone. I think rather than moving to independence, what we're moving towards is interdependence and how we journey those connections well, so that we have some kind of say in that. We're not dependent, but we're interdependent and we're learning healthy relationships. So our teens really, really need us at this time. Connection is still crucial, as is safety. In fact, just like our teenagers' brains are kind of laying down this protective coating, that myelin coating around their neural connections that makes them more effective, safe relationships can act in a kind of similar protective way for a child's mental health and well-being. So there's been some brilliant research by Young Minds recently, and they discovered that the more adults a young person has in their life that they trust and that they feel safe talking to, the greater the reduction in their likelihood of developing a mental health condition. So when you're journeying with young people, you're making a massive difference. You're kind of like the myelin coating around those connections. You are acting as this kind of supportive network that can act as a protective and almost preventative measure when you are bringing healthy connection and relationship with our kids. So we're going to keep showing up. We're going to keep creating safe spaces where their growing brains can bring curiosity and challenge and question and explore all of the things that dopamine is making them want to do, but in a really safe way. So I was kind of sat with that thinking, well, what does that look like for us? How can we bring connection and safety with our teenagers? And in Hebrews 12, verse 1, there's this beautiful verse about being surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And I think that's what our young people really need. They need cheerleaders who are for them and who are with them. People who create safe spaces and bring safe approaches and are that great cloud of witnesses that stand with them like that myelin coating. We're going to hold them and we're going to stand with them and cheer them on through the craziness of dopamine levels that means they're seeking out thrills and all of the challenges that it brings, because actually what's happening in that isn't them going wild. It's actually their brains preparing them for what they need and what comes next. So, wonder moment again on adolescent brain development. I'll stop sharing to finish. Let me actually just escape so I don't lose my PowerPoint again like I did last time. And we'll do a how and a wow. Any questions or any thoughts that are amazing on adolescent brain development, and then we're going to pull it all together in a bit of a bigger reflective activity.
My comment would be, okay, go on. Church children or children who are used to being in a church environment often are, well, I suppose you can't say it for all of them, but for a lot, it's a good process of making friendships with people of all ages. You know, they have a wide circle of people. As you say, it needs to be safe, but they have the opportunity of engaging with different people and seeing different people of different stages of life. And I think that's actually good, because not all families have, you know, grandparents, or, you know, that some families, certainly if they're single parent families, you know, they're lacking in male figures or whatever. But it's actually an opportunity within a church fellowship, as long as it's safe, that they will be able to feel that they're part of a wider, it is the family of the church, isn't it?
Yeah, 100% agree. It's the strength of our community when we do it well. And I think there was, I was listening to a YouTube clip talking about this kind of stuff recently, and they were talking about how historically we've just had much more extended connected family, we've lived more in community, and we've much more got kind of isolated family networks now, and the knock on for that. So if all of this stuff, you know, and I'm saying if it's true, and it is true, we're discovering it scientifically, all of the preparation that's going on in the brain is all about kind of moving on. It's not that family ceases to be important, and research time and time again shows that kids still feel the importance of their family, but there is this kind of pull really away from and looking at what it means to live themselves and to challenge relationships, which can mean for a time that the child-parent relationship can be challenging. But actually, when we're living in community, there are other people. We are constantly going, who is in our girls' corner? Because we know there are conversations that we are very capable of having, but not according to our children.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And so who are the other people that are going to stand with them in that space and be the kind of cheerleader and champion when for us we're not the person that they want? So yeah, it's that network, and we do it beautifully in the church if we can do it well. Totally agree. Any
I
other?
was taken, Lisa, by your use it or lose it slide. That's two things that I'd like be interested to know what you think about them. As you can see behind me, I'm musical. And I wonder if having that as, or learning that as a teenager has affected the way my brain works. And I ask that because my granddaughter, one of my granddaughters, lives in Dundee, and her mum is Scout, like her dad. Sorry, yeah, like her dad. But her father is Hungarian.
Okay.
Csaba, my son-in-law. Now, Molly speaks Hungarian reasonably fluidly, but my daughter, as an adult, has really struggled to learn a foreign language, even though Csaba is speaking it to her regularly. And I don't want to go as binary as left brain, right brain, but is there something about the way we encourage the activities we offer that engage different sides of the brain or different methods of learning that help with that use it rather than lose it approach?
Yeah. I think, I mean, there's loads to kind of sit with that, isn't there? The language thing is really interesting. I was reading a report that they've just done a bit more research on language acquisition and basically kind of shown how it drops off. So like under fives just like absorb language like anything, and then there does seem to be a bit of a drop off the older and older you get. I was a language teacher. That's what I originally trained at, to teach French and Spanish. So I find it's really fascinating. But so there's definitely that, but the kind of use it lose it thing is really interesting for us to sit with, because the thing I was reading on in this recently was talking about children who are isolated and sit in their rooms and are kind of gaming all the time without connection with others during those really crucial times of pruning. And those are the kind of networks that are going to be kept and other stuff that's pruned. It just really makes you reflect on what we bring to our kids' experience of teenage years, and how we encourage that and flourish, and the experiences we give them at that time. But yeah, it's an interesting, and I feel slightly scary if you sit with it for too long thing. But yeah. Any other thoughts?
I think it's fascinating, really, because as a youth worker, I'm permanently trying to stop them from, it seems like, destroying themselves. Do you know, because of the risk thing, I think they want to like run round, pile on each other. They're playing really like crazily, but then that's what we've created, a safe space for them to be able to do that. But it's that balance, isn't it, between keeping everybody safe and providing the opportunities for them to like have risk. You know, residentials are perfect, aren't they? You know, do some rock climbing while you're tied on to a thing. So all that really helps, doesn't it? That we can bring safe places for them to take risks, but where it's safe and managed.
And that's the key, isn't it? It's like, we're not just going to get rid of risk, because taking risk is actually a really important part of development in a healthy way. But
Yeah.
it's how do we help them do that in a really safe way? Not how do we wrap them in cotton wool, because there's no growth and development from that. But how do we do it safely, in a kind of boundaried way? So Dan Siegel in his Brainstorm books talks about when his teenage son was a teenager, spending time in the car park of the hospital where he worked because it was shut down at the weekends. So they'd go with like rollerblades and skateboards and whiz down all the ramps together in the car park, because it's risk taking, but we're going to do it together, and we're going to do it with helmets, and we're going to do it safely. And so it's managing and kind of mitigating risk, but still creating the space for growth and development and learning. It's good. We one of the primary schools that I taught at, we had a really big bit of land, and it didn't happen before I left, and I hope they've still looked at it. But they were looking at, because we were in quite a tricky space with children who've experienced quite a lot of trauma, and their behaviour was a little bit risky at times. But it was, how do we were looking at creating like a BMX track down the hill.
Oh, wow.
And then teaching them to ride their bikes well and putting helmets on. But so how do you create those opportunities, but then how do we guide them through it safely? Yeah, it's good. Good. Well, we haven't got loads of time left, so I've got one last little activity. If I can share my screen one more time. And that's worked much more smoothly. That's good. So this is an activity that I like to use quite a lot when I'm doing any training, because I think it's a good way to land. So it's a head, heart, hands reflection. This is a really good one if you've got teams. I used to use this when I was when I had like a staff team. We'd use this as our check-in. So what's on your mind at the moment? What's in your hands? What are you up to? What's on your heart? So it's a really good check-in tool. So I recommend it, but it's a good reflective tool to finish with. So I'll just give you a moment, and then if you are feel happy to share, that would be great. But what has made you think? So what's kind of racing around your thoughts as we've looked at briefly a slight dip our toe into child and adolescent brain development. And then heart is what has really resonated with you. Is there something that is stirred up in you that you're like, oh, I'm just going to sit with that and just notice what's going on, and maybe think about it some more. And then hands is the good one, because hands is what you're going to put into practice. So is there something that's made you go, do you know what, we need to really think about that more, and there's something we can do about it? So I'll give you a couple of minutes. I'm quite happy holding silence. We're fine with that. So just have a few minutes to think about those three areas. I'll leave this on the screen so you've got something to look at, and then I'll take it down and we'll have a chat together. So what's made you think? What's resonated in your heart? And is there something you're going to put into practice? Okay. Anyone got any thoughts might be helpful? It's always interesting to see what has made other people think, because I think then we get to learn from other people's thought processes. So if you're happy to share, it'd be great. We can learn from it.
I just had a horrible thought about a young parent I saw who was letting a 3-year-old go down a skate ramp on a bike, on a trike that wasn't going to work. As me and someone else could see, it was not going to work. It was too dangerous. But this young man, who was clearly a young parent, he just couldn't see it. And it was too far away to, I thought, well, what do you do? What on earth? And yeah, she just, the bike turned right over before anyone could kind of stop it or intervene and I wondered what had happened in his life that he had no, it was he just couldn't see that was so, it was so obvious it was dangerous. But then I thought tonight made me think about that, and I suddenly thought, right, well, maybe he didn't, there's something about his upbringing that made him think that was okay. It just wasn't. So I'm going to think more about, but in my professional life, because I'm a health visitor, I will think more about the young teenage parents that I come into contact with. And although I asked them about who's supporting them, I will try and keep hold of them a bit longer, because we used to have a special team that worked with young mothers, and we don't have them anymore. The government got rid of them. They don't pay that. And I think, listening to you tonight made me really think about where there's a big lack of support for those young parents, sort of 16 onwards. Even if they've got, kind of parents, they're not always around, they're not always living nearby. And yeah, so that's made me think. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh, that's good. I mean, we all need people to journey with us, particularly when you're a new parent,
Yeah,
but even
yeah,
more so when you are a child yourself whose brain is still building and learning
yeah.
emotional regulation and all of the stuff that comes with that. So yeah, what a beautiful role you've got to be able to hold them a little and journey with.
Hope so. Hope
Yeah,
so.
that's
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks. Any other thoughts?
I must admit, I'm feeling quite affirmed. Partly when you were talking about the relationship, that the greater number of relationships with adults and how beneficial that is, and the United Reformed Church for the last couple of years has been pushing and developing and enabling churches through people like me and other trainers, the idea of intergenerational church, which is intentional in its intergeneration work about making those connections across generations, encouraging them to happen rather than just being in the same room at the same time. So I think, yeah, I'm thinking, that's right, I'm not doing so bad on that. Quite pleased with that.
Great. And you've got some science to back up what you're doing when people are like wondering whether they're going to invest and fund things. Like scientifically, this is important. So that's good. Great. Anyone else?
I suppose what
I
go on.
I couldn't see. I can't see lips moving.
I
Susan,
would, I would say, sorry,
Ruth, go.
I would say the same sort of, yeah, bit of reassurance that we are, doing the right thing really. When we sometimes run a holiday club, but this Friday, when it's not a holiday club, but we're having the families, families are coming. Well, we don't have much connection with the parents because the children come and the parents go, so but yeah, just again trying to build up that connectedness with the children, but also with the parents, building relationships and yeah, being a safe place.
And I think at times, that kind of relational work has kind of been deemed like the fluffy stuff, which makes me really cross because we can see how valuable and how important it is when we journey well with our kids, when we champion them, when we cheer them on, when we make space to listen to them, and to build relationship that's healthy and safe. It's so valuable and so important. So if that's the fluffy stuff, then I'm really happy to keep doing the fluffy stuff.
Yeah, but
Because
it's
I
knowing
think
the
it's actually
children.
really beauty.
Yeah, it's knowing the children as well, isn't it? So what, the level of development and what they would be interested in doing, and
Yeah.
making it appropriate to them.
Yes. Brilliant. Thanks. Anyone else?
Well, only to say, yes, I've thoroughly enjoyed revisiting what I call the subject. And I feel very much the uniqueness of each individual child, and the parents. I mean, there's business of, yes, the younger the parents, I suppose their brains are developing along, aren't they, of their young parents, and that, you know, just reminds me. But I think it's listening, you know, because some children, if they're in a larger family, you may not have much opportunity of being listened to. And I mean, as I say, that there's a lot to be very positive about all this. So thank you. Yeah.
No, it's good.
Mm.
It's I don't know if anyone else has caught up with the it's gone out of my mind. What's the cricket guy called that's been doing the programme?
Is that it?
Andrew Flintoff.
Flintoff.
Freddie Flintoff.
Yes.
Freddie
Mm.
Flintoff's Field of Dreams. So we've just watched the most recent episode, and what has really stood out to me is just when you get the kids on their own, just one-to-one on the camera, the stuff that they come out with is actually incredible. They're so insightful. And they are able to kind of put into words sometimes what genuinely is going on. And you just think, man, if we just paused more to listen, we would just be able to so much better journey with them, because they're telling us what they need and how and what's going on in their heads. And it's just really interesting. So listening is so important. And I think sometimes I know that I am definitely guilty of this. I think there's a really good quote by the guy. Oh man, sorry. It's this time of the evening, my brain stops working. Stephen Covey, who wrote Highly Effective Habits of Highly Effective People. But basically, his quote says that some people listen with the intent to respond rather than the intent to respond or reply rather than the intent to understand. And I think that's so true. We can sometimes, we're listening because we know we've got something wise that we can add and say afterwards, rather than just the intent to understand what is being said to us and really hear it and really tune in. So yeah, if we can do that better, I mean, so much, we're going to journey so much more effectively. Thanks. Brilliant. Thanks so much, everyone. It's been lovely to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been really helpful.
Yes. Positive.
Oh, I've enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I put links to the book that you mentioned in the chat and link to your website, wonderfulme.org.uk.
Perfect.
You said the magic phrase, which was free resources. So, you know, I'm sure we'll all be visiting that shortly afterwards. Can we thank you not just for tonight, but for all the work that you do with local churches and organisations, helping them be more aware and responsive to the needs of children and young people, and in supporting people like us who are doing the work day in and day out.